what are we doing in making an investment for them to be a great parent? We need more of that in our world. We're a construction company, right? There's 3 reasons we build: population growth, depreciation, change of use. Well, if our population isn't growing, we're not going to be around 10, 20, 30 years from now. So I really look at it, that longer approach of, we need to have great families in our workforce. We need people having, children and being great parents. And so what are we doing as an organization to support them at key points in their career, but to also be the parent at home that they need to be?
Welcome to Beyond the Ledger, real conversations with people driving business forward. I'm Troy Ashby, CPA and host. Each episode, we unpack stories, challenges, and insights from today's top accounting and finance leaders. This podcast is brought to you by my friends over at MarketScale. Welcome back to Beyond the Ledger. Today's guest is Jessica Greiner, CFO of Talley Riggins Construction Group, one of DFW's fastest growing middle market construction firms. Jessica brings more than 20 years of experience across corporate finance, capital markets, and strategy. She also brings a rare mix of financial rigor and a heart-led leadership to an industry built on both structure and people. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been waiting for this for a long time. I'm glad that we get to share a little bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. I'm used to talking about other businesses and the company and promoting a certain firm, if you will, but about myself, it's a little different. So thank you.
Yeah, well, you've got a great story for people to hear about. Before we jump into that, I would love for you to share just a little bit about you.
Okay.
That typical question, tell me about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm a servant of Jesus, wife to my husband. We've been together over 20 years, and I'm a mom to 4 grade school children, which I'm sure we'll dig into the unconventionalness of that soon too. But love working now with construction. Most of my career has been on kind of the industrial market side with both manufacturing and equipment leasing, but there's a lot of similarities in the construction world.
Well, good. Thanks for sharing a little bit about that. So let's go all the way back. Baylor grad.
Baylor grad.
Were you always know you're going to go into the finance and accounting realm? How did that come about?
I didn't. When I started at Baylor, you were still able to go in as more of the general business study. You didn't have to declare yet. I did well in all of my accounting classes. So by my sophomore year, they started saying, oh, you need to be an accounting major. And I just thought, no, that's not me.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. Always loved finance, always loved marketing. I was exposed to business at a very young age, entrepreneurially, and just really loved more of the strategy type classes where everything was always brought in together in different facets of business. So when it came time to graduate, it was, you're going to be a banker, you're going to be a financial planner. And I really didn't want any of those things. So I went the obvious consulting route. And that's really where I started.
Got it. So consulting's broad.
Yes.
Lots of different consulting opportunities. But what did that look like for you?
Yes, I started at Accenture, was there a couple years. I was in the finance and performance management practice, which was a great fit. It took me to clients, though different from a technology standpoint. I was with Blockbuster and Singular, which is now AT&T, obviously. And really, from there, it started to get kind of lost in this balance of consulting was supposed to give you all this exposure to different things, yet truly from a performance standpoint, if you're not on site, not with a client for a long time, you get lost in the weeds when it comes time for your performance ranking at the end of the year. So after a couple of years, I went into private equity with a company here in Dallas. Did that for a couple of years on more of the business analyst side. I was really a liaison between IT coming out of Accenture and into the business for both the legal and the client compliance department. And from there was one of the fortunate last in, first out candidates, but that took me to Trinity Industries, where I was an FP&A analyst to the C-suite. And that's really where my career started.
Awesome. You mentioned something that some of our listeners may not hear. I think they've all heard the story, but you mentioned Blockbuster.
Uh-huh.
How much time did you spend on Blockbuster?
Really almost 2 years.
Yeah.
We were a part of a project that was Blockbuster was trying to compete with Netflix. If you remember, we used to get our movies in the mail from the CDs. And so Blockbuster was trying to figure out how they leverage their inventory in all of the different retail stores as many distribution centers to mail those DVDs to their customers. So we were a part of a team that was putting that structure in place.
Well, that's unique.
Yeah.
Now they're no more.
Yeah, I think it was probably a little too late in reacting to the market, but it was still a really interesting effort at the time. And it's still a good story.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So you're at Trinity. Yeah. And was this a traditional finance role? I know you kind of took a little detour in here somewhere. Yeah. But was that at Trinity that you did that?
It was. And it actually was supposed to be practice interviews for me. I had told the recruiter, I said, hey, it's been about 5 years since I've had to describe balance sheets and income statements in an interview. So can you give me some kind of practice runs before you really put me in front of clients that you think I might blend well with? And they kept asking me back. And honestly, I didn't feel like they were asking me a lot of questions in the interviews, but I guess the resume that I had from the standpoint of that technology and the business analyst and understanding systems and dashboards. And I think one of the hiring managers was a former Accenture Arthur Anderson person. So he, we really connected, and it was a great personality fit. And at the end of the day, when the offer came, I asked the recruiter, I said, are you sure this is right? And he knew more about the role than I did. And he goes, listen, if you don't take this job, we can't work together anymore because you're going to have direct line of sight to the C-suite and you don't understand how important that is.
Yeah.
And for darn sure if he wasn't right.
That's amazing. It's funny, right? Because you were taking it just for practice.
Yeah.
And you know, what I do, I always tell people, what's harm of one conversation?
Right.
And then look where it took you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's pretty cool. All right. So what'd you do there and how'd that kind of transform your background?
Yes, it started there in 2008 as a FP&A analyst, really working with all of the controllers. At that time, we had almost 14 different business segments that rolled up into 5 different groups. And so we were really going through the build out of dashboards from an FP&A perspective, reporting on actuals and then reporting on projections. And really, you know, that was probably 80% of the job up front. But then there was a small group of analysts and we would get kind of loaned out to C-level executives or the business unit presidents for ad hoc analysis that they may need on a case-by-case basis within their businesses. A couple years later, we had a CFO transition and the new CFO grabbed me and said, hey, you have a really strong command of what's going on across all of our businesses. I need you to help me prepare for earnings conference calls. I thought, well, I don't know a lot about what that is, but, you know, I'm happy to learn about it and definitely support you however you need. So he threw me this investor relations magazine. He goes, here, well, read this. I just need you to get inside, you know, the psyche of the Wall Street analyst and, you know, go back and read a couple transcripts. You know, and really, the more I read and the more I discovered, I went back to him. I said, boss, this is like most public companies. This is a fully fledged functioning department. And he said, well, if you want it, take it, run it, find your replacement and go. And that was kind of 2010. So a couple years in, I became the director of investor relations for Trinity, and that really launched the rest of my career.
So that's amazing because is that 5-6 years post graduation,
Mm-hmm.
and you've skyrocketed to director?
Mm-hmm.
Was that you created? Were you creating that department? Was it just
essentially
you?
building it from the ground up?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there were processes in place, obviously, for public company standards from the standpoint of our 10Q and our earnings conference calls. But really, it was more now, how do we engage with Wall Street? How do we bring them in? How do we track what conversations were happening? You know, investors find us and they own our stock, but do we have the right mix of investors that we want? Are we going out and finding the long-term investors that align with the strategy that we have for the company?
Wow.
So it was getting those types of systems and processes in place. And it was really, truly that blend of the marketing degree and the business aspect that I loved with understanding the finance and the accounting side of things.
It's like a really cool blend.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a pretty big leap.
It was.
So talk through that. Somebody gets an opportunity that maybe they're like, oh gosh, am I,
Mm-hmm.
that imposter syndrome is like, am
Yeah.
I good enough for that?
Yes.
So walk through how you kind of overcame those fears, or maybe you
Yeah.
didn't have them and you're like, yeah, this is it. I got it.
No, I'd say the first 2 to 3 years really were a lot of just listening, right? I mean, the beauty of, I think, being earlier in your career is you can still say, that's an interesting way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Let me take that back and let me think on it. Or, hey, that's a great question. Our executives may have a different thought process and how they would want to communicate that across the broader Wall Street landscape. So let me, take that note down and, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And so there's, whenever you answer something that's wrong or incorrect, right? That's always when you get in trouble. So it was just more that learning experience of, hear what's going on, hear their point of view, understand where management is and where, how they want to talk and communicate about the business. And how can we kind of find the balance in making sure that our audience, right, our target market is hearing what we want to be communicating about the long-term plans of the business. And if there's a disconnect, it's my job to really bring that viewpoint back to management and say, what can we do in helping them understand what we are trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So with that, are you then like, are you rebranding? Is it remessaging? Is it?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes. From quarter to quarter, there's always changes in the business, right? And there's going to be changes in the market that might affect your projections or the guidance that you have out there. But the company also did, if we fast forward kind of 4 to 5 years from there, we went through a huge spinoff where we spun out was about a quarter to a third of the business at the time. And it's now called Arcosa. And they're just doing fabulous. But we spun off that business. And so when I came back into the investor relations role at that time, it was a rebranding effort. We had whole new management teams, all new messaging, all new investor relations presentations. And so that marketing element came right back into the finance side of things.
So how many years have you spent there at this point?
Oh, gosh. At that point, that was 8 years.
All right. And were you, did you start getting an itch? Were you happy?
Yeah.
Were you missing something?
No, I did. I love that role because it was really a good blend for me from the standpoint of where I was also in my personal life as a mother. I know we'll probably circle back to that. But there was always something new. I was always learning something about, different business structures or, hey, now we had an activist investor. What does that look like? How do we respond to different legal situations that the company's in? So there was always something that was new or different that I was learning that, from a career standpoint, you can take with you because you're going to see it again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't say I really had the itch to do something different until really kind of pre-COVID, I'd say over the COVID timeframe. We had gone through our last management transition at the time that was really under my tenure, and he started to ask me, what else do you want to do? You can't do this role forever.
Yeah.
And I kind of sat back and I said, why not? I like it and I'm good at it. But it really kind of it made me take a pause and ask myself, okay, is this what I want to do? I either have to become a technical expert in investor relations, or I do need to kind of push myself to look at a broader role. And coincidentally, a gentleman I had worked for who had been in the business brought an opportunity to me in helping him launch his private equity fund out of Chicago. And I got to also work from home, which I didn't get to do during COVID when everyone else was. So it was kind of a great blend timing where I was personally and professionally, and I took the opportunity. So
awesome. So another change.
And
we will come back to this, and we're going to put a pencil in it because I do want to talk about balancing being a parent and all of these amazing roles that you've had. So, but let's talk about where you're at now.
Yes.
Exciting. So talk to us about Talley Riggins and kind of how your past set you up for the CFO spot.
Yeah. So I took a little break in between the private equity role and joining Talley Riggins. I really just let my network know, hey, here's the types of things I'd be interested in. But I also wasn't in a big rush to get back to the professional life. I had never taken any time to be mom, and I was really enjoying myself. Thought about doing some entrepreneurial things as well, but just letting them know, hey, if you come across something that's out there, let me know about it. And when the recruiter called about the Talley Riggins CFO role, and I got to meet with the partners of the firm, just really aligned with them from a core values perspective on how they wanted to run the business, how they wanted to grow the business, and what their needs were as far as why they were searching for a CFO role. So it was really kind of the perfect fit, and that was summer of 2024.
All right, so you've been wearing the hat. Something we can talk about that I'm interested to hear is, it's hard to attract talent. It's even harder to retain them sometimes. What have you seen that's been working for you, whether it be at Talley Riggins or any of your roles? But that's the best way to build a team that can sustain and you can really make change.
I think it's important to always, regardless of what the role is, you need to call out the things that could be the differentiators, right? I mean, there are a lot of accounting firms out there, or there's a lot of accounting roles or finance roles that are out there, but what is it about your company that makes it different? What are the benefits around the employee that we're putting in there? What are the possibilities for how you can grow in this role? A lot of times people come in and, yes, I'm going to do this for 1, 2, 3 years, but what's beyond that?
Yeah.
Really painting the bigger picture of where the company wants to go and how that creates opportunities in a future for that candidate in a position. Fortunately for us, we are growing very quickly. And I've always had the benefit of my mentors, my managers really showing me their roles and what they do from a day-to-day perspective and really helping me think through things with them. And so from my standpoint, I want to do the same, right? As a CFO, I may not be the CFO for forever, So what am I doing to perpetuate the importance of this role, and how am I opening it to my accounting managers or the controllers that could be future CFOs, either for Talley Riggins or for other organizations? So it's that professional development, that mentoring, that yes, you're here to do a job, but I also want to make sure that you succeed longer term.
Yeah. So investing in their
Absolutely.
personal growth too.
Yeah.
And I guess I could probably feel that, right? Because I think sometimes leaders are just doing a job.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes employees are just doing a job.
Right.
But those successful organizations, I think, do invest in their employees.
I think so. And it's always a hard question, too, I think, for a candidate coming in as being interviewed, right? I'm being interviewed for a role, but it's hard for me to ask beyond you're bringing me here for this. And if I'm already asking you what's next, then I may not look committed. Right. But I think to attract people, to retain people, right, I need to set that longer term picture out there of what is it that we're going to be doing for you.
Yeah. All right. So let's rewind and talk about juggling. I think that's the best way, although I can't juggle 4 kids like you do. I barely juggle 3 balls, but I mean, you've got 4 kids.
Well, I can't juggle it all, so you're good.
You've got 4 kids.
I do.
And managing a very successful career in a pretty stressful environment. I mean, talk about how you were able to balance that and how that's made you the leader that you are, because not everybody can do it.
Yes. Well, caveat everything. We have very, very involved grandparents. They're a local that helps significantly. And we took the investment approach of bringing in nannies, because the unconventional aspect of this is I have triplet boys that are 11. And so when you are trying to find infant daycare for 3 at once, you're either hiring a nanny or you're staying home.
Yeah.
And so we really kind of sat back and just leveraged every amount of help that we can. But knowing that that's what it took for me to be a professional, in whether it's high stress roles or not, I think it really changed my heart and my perspective of what parenthood in the workplace looks like.
Yeah.
And it made me more attuned to what maybe other people on our teams aren't saying about what's going on at home. and the dynamic that being a parent brings to the workforce.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because I think sometimes people leave their, it's like their kids and their family aren't even talked about at work, right? And I experienced it too. Before I had kids, I didn't understand those that had kids. So talk about how that made you a different leader in those perspectives.
Yeah, well, there was no hiding. I was pregnant with triplets. So, and then it's kind of been my claim to fame, I guess. So, even if I don't volunteer that information, someone else will in a meeting. So it's kind of, hey, it's an open book. If you have a question, ask me. I'm not afraid to talk about it. But I think, in looking at it, asking the questions about what people are going through. I mean, the hard part is, I think, generationally, when you look at millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers, right? There's certain characteristics. We're all products of our environment. And they're pretty narrow when you look at generationally what all those things are, right? My mentors, my bosses have all been Gen X or baby boomer. And so for them, when I got pregnant with triplets, it was, are you coming back?
Right.
What's it going to take for you to come back? And so it was almost this forced perspective of, because she's in a key role and now this is happening, what are we going to do to make sure she gets there? Right.
Right.
And I really had to take a step back and say, okay, but not everyone's going to have triplets or even twins. Right. And we can't, what I get to do in my role, everybody sees it. So are we making sure that access, that ability is available to all of our people? Now, also caveat, I am not in the camp of you give it away at will. I do think that you have to earn it.
And you're talking about flexibility.
Flexibility, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you bring your life to work, and how does what happens beyond 8 to 5 impact what you do on a day-to-day basis? I always tell young professionals coming into the workforce, this is your time to put in the work to show that you have that credibility of performance, that you're going to get the job done no matter what it takes. And when you do that and you're consistent in it, when the time comes and you have a family, or, you need to go take that family vacation because mom said you're going to grandma's 80th birthday, come hell or high water, your managers are going to understand that you're committed and that you're going to do what you need to do, even if you're not in the office.
Right. So building equity.
Yes, building that trust and that equity in the respect that you have for your work and for your team and your company. And I think that's an important element to it. And I always tell people too, even let's say you do give that flexibility instead of it's a merit-based earned incentive, right? At the end of the day, you are going to see it in their performance.
Sure. Yeah.
It's gonna come, whether it's in delayed reporting, work that's turned in that's half done. So you're still going to have a performance-based excuse to say, look, you took advantage of a benefit that we give you, and we're not going to let that happen. And we've got to be, as managers, pretty, I wouldn't say strict or intense, but pretty fair in how we draw that line and making sure that you are keeping that standard so that it stays respected across the workforce.
Yeah. So you're managing people by individual accomplishments then, instead of policy? Or, I mean, do companies always probably have a policy, but are you adapting that a little bit?
I think you have to. I mean, companies have to put policies in place based on the sizes of their organizations.
Yeah.
Right. The CEO for AT&T,
Yeah.
right? His policy that he has to put in place for workplace arrangements is going to be very different than how Trinity is going to put it in place and how Talley Riggins is going to put this in place, right? Or how a 4-person shop is going to put it in place. When you read through even AT&T's memo, I mean, I highlighted it, I marked it all up, and I went, oh, that phrase right there, the lawyer's made him put that in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That phrase right there, that's a catch-all because he had to put that in. He needed to give this manager the ability to manage at their discretion.
Right.
But it's softened in such a way that someone who doesn't know that is going to read it and go, oh, wow, they're being really, they're really trying to enforce this. I think every company, it behooves them to really look at their workforce and say, what is this going to do for us? What do we need to do for our people?
Right.
Maybe you're a company that's made up of all 20 somethings. Your policy might look one way. Maybe you're a company that you're a remote-based technology company, and that policy is going to look somewhere else. We're a construction company, right? We've got guys in the field that have to show up every day, or the project doesn't get built. But are the arrangements for our office staff have to be the same as our field staff? Are there things that we can do to help our field staff have some flexibility so that there's some fairness or equivalence of how the office staff performs? And we're not perfect. We're still evolving too, right? But as a manager, I try to look at it as, what do my people need? My 24-year-old analyst doesn't need what my accounting manager needs 10 years into her career with young children.
Yeah.
Early grade school. They're starting to get into sports, but I promise you in 3 to 5 years from now, her life is going to look a little bit different.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And that's going to be different than what, a project manager may need who's near retirement. And that's going to look different from someone who's got college age kids and high schoolers. So I think just being aware of what people's family lives look like, and also their own personal needs, right? Everyone's different. Some people want to be around an organization all the time, or they understand that they work well or better in front of their computer in an office. Right. They get too distracted at home. That's great for them to acknowledge that and to have that discipline, right? I actually probably am more efficient in my home office than I am in my work office, because I like to connect with people while I'm there, but then there's constant interruptions.
There's no way for them to just pop in.
Right.
Yeah.
There's those constant interruptions unless we're in meetings. So I get a lot more done in my work office. I hate shutting my door and shutting people out.
And I think you said it right. Everybody does. It's, I am better in the office, but that's because if I work from home, I might just lose track of time and work myself to death. Mm-hmm. Or I might actually put a little laundry in, and who knows? Yeah. You just never know. But I work better in the office. How are you? Are you having conversations about those often? Is this, how are you navigating this?
Yeah.
From your level down and implement it that somebody else could listen and learn.
Yeah, we're evolving too, right? We're still, I'd say, implementing. There's not really a one size fits all. Or we have a standard, and we want you to be there. But I think we also know things come up for people, and we have to adjust when we have to.
Yeah. And you were talking. We were talking a few days ago. You did some research on just kind of how things have evolved, like parents today versus parents in the previous generations. Can you allude a little bit about that? Because it sounds like you really dove pretty deep into this.
Well, and I hate when it becomes a mom's discussion, right? And because it's not just about working mothers, because there's fathers in this equation too. But when you look at, in 2024, we don't have 25 data yet. But mothers over the age of 30 accounted for 52% of all U.S. births. 40 years ago, that was 26%. So it's doubled, right? The generation in between was about 37. So there's more mothers having kids at age 30. And let's say then the fathers as well, right? Let's make the assumption that they're about the same age. That's usually pretty fair. So at age 30 or 35, we've got a lot of people in the workforce that are 8, 10, 12 years into their careers. They're in middle management, right? They're kind of that next up-and-comer from an executive level perspective. And they're trying to raise families, at a key point in their careers as well. And what are we doing in making an investment for them to be a great parent? We need more of that in our world. We're a construction company, right? There's 3 reasons we build: population growth, depreciation, change of use. Well, if our population isn't growing, we're not going to be around 10, 20, 30 years from now. So I really look at it, that longer approach of, we need to have great families in our workforce. We need people having, children and being great parents. And so what are we doing as an organization to support them at key points in their careers, but to also be the parent at home that they need to be? Sidebar on that, when you look at the percentage of dual income household earners,
Yeah, this is really
the
interesting.
importance of both parents working, we used to see a lot of those women drop out of the workforce, right? Because it didn't make sense anymore. Department of Labor for DFW, 8 to 15% of a household income is for childcare.
Wow.
Shocking, isn't
That's
it?
huge.
And that just says household income. It doesn't say the dads or the moms, but household.
Right.
So if the woman in that family is only contributing a small percentage of their overall household income, more likely than not, that daycare cost doesn't make sense.
Yep.
But what we've seen in that same generations of time in that 40-year span is that 40 years ago, 15% of marriages had what they call egalitarian household income. The woman made as much as the man. Today, that's tripled. It's closer to 50%. So you have truly equal income contribution to the equation for the family, also being parents.
Right.
So now you have the question of who's going to take Johnny to school and who's going to pick up Sarah from dance. And what if we don't have grandma in town that lives half a mile down the street, right? There is a dual responsibility in fostering that parenthood and taking care of the children at, again, a pivotal time in someone's professional career.
You've really dove in on this. So let me make sure I understood this. So is it today, so back to the 50-50 parents, and it's still 10 to 15% childcare? Or is that an old data?
The 8 to 15% was a more recent study that DFL did for DFW. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So people are, having kids later, more dual income working families. And, COVID came and we got a taste on that. You got to be hybrid even before that. So you'd already kind of, is that right?
Through COVID, so I did a lot of traveling.
Okay.
And I had flexibility because of the boys were young.
Yeah.
But no, during COVID, we, railcar manufacturing is called an essential service.
Yeah.
And as a leadership team, we wanted to show our people that management wasn't afraid to come in.
Yeah.
So I went in 3, 4, 5 days a week to the office.
All right. Is this when you started diving in all this research?
No, I didn't. Probably in the last year or so, I've looked more into it because Jessica, that's just your experience. That's not it for everybody.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, maybe my experience is anecdotal from what I had, but I'd never really sat down and tried to put numbers to it.
Right.
It was just, I know a lot of my friends that have fallen out of the workforce because of these things, or they stayed in because they're also, great professional women that are kicking butt in their careers. But what does that look like? And so all I could say was, well, of my, 10 or 20 friends, here's what I see. But is that, again, a certain demographic of what I'm looking at, of my circle, of my network, or does that go more broadly beyond?
Yeah, that's really good. I remember you and I sat down a few months ago and you were asking some of these questions. And in what I do every day, 75% of every person I talk to needs some sort of either hybrid or flexibility, or that's their desire. And I had thought about it about the state. I mean, of course, almost all of them are parents. And, we all talk about being, glorified Uber or Lyft drivers and getting from, A to B. And my wife and I were talking just today about how, we've got to be in Frisco, but we also have to be down by Preston Center. And how are we going to make that work after work? So Casey and I are trying to figure out those logistics, and all these candidates or all these employees are doing the same thing. At the same time, there's this tug of war because there's so many companies, especially in North Texas, that are return to work or a little bit less flexible from the hybrid standpoint. But what's your thoughts on, to me, it's almost about the flexibility side. Now, some need the hybrid and the remote, but what are your thoughts on just giving flexibility, like, coming in early, leaving late? Some people do 9/9s, or what's your thoughts on those?
Why do we have to make a square peg fit into a round hole? I mean, it's
Yeah.
everyone is going to be different. We've got 22-year-olds, 34-year-olds, 66-year-olds. Some people live 2 miles from the office. Some people live 40 miles from the office. I saw another interesting stat the other day, watching the news in Dallas. I think they put it at like a 6-mile drive, right? Used to take 9 minutes. Well, now on average, it takes 12 to 15.
Sure.
So we're not moving, but our commutes are getting longer. And what does that do to our bandwidth to be able to get to work or be a parent, right? I always say work smarter, not harder. I can't change the amount of hours I have in a day, but I can be more efficient with the time that I have.
Sure.
So what does that look like? Is that taking meetings during my commute? Is that listening to this podcast or that webinar on my drive home for the day? Does that mean picking one day a week where this is going to be my day this week to work a little bit longer in the office to catch up so that I can pick up my kids from school on Friday?
Right. Yeah.
What does that arrangement look like? But just because that's the one that I have, it doesn't mean that's going to work for you.
Right. Back to no policies. Right.
Right.
Everybody's situation is different.
So leaving something a little bit more generic and just saying, listen, I don't want to be a micromanager for my people. I don't want to say it's going to be butts and seats 8 to 5. Now, some companies you may have to do that. Some positions you may have to say that, right? Again, going back to manufacturing, construction, there's things in the field you have to be there. But what does that look like around those things that we can help provide some reprieve to be, both a great professional and a great workforce? I know more of our audience is going to be more your office administrative, finance, accounting functions. So it's a little bit different in that sense. They're looking for those things. Again, I think it goes back to, are we listening to our people to learn and understand, or are we listening to answer?
Yeah.
My experience and my perspective may be very different, but until you've heard why and you understand why, then you can go think and reflect on, okay, that makes sense, but I still want to have this policy or this arrangement.
Right.
But when we all understand kind of what's going on and the dynamics for everyone, I don't want to micromanage you and tell you how to be there. I want you to earn the fact that you're going to come to work and you're going to get your job done, and your work coming can be where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Culturally, you should want to come into the office or be with your team regularly. But there's also going to be an element of sometimes you need to be somewhere else, and that's okay too. And I think generationally, when you look at different companies and the policies, take a look at who their executives are setting policies.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Generally,
you can
companies that have lots of flexibility, no PTO policies, their leaders are millennials or maybe even Gen Zers.
Sure.
Right? The ones that are putting in return to work, 8 to 5, no work arrangements, they are Gen Xers and baby boomers. So, and again,
also, we have this weird
we're products of our environment, right?
We are. We're in this weird time, right? We have several more generations in the workforce than before, later retirements. Yeah. And then, so I think there's some of that tug of war on exactly what you're just saying. It's pretty interesting stuff. I could dive into it because I see it from my perspective that, like you said, it's like my 20 friends or the 100 people I talked to in my job that day, or, whatever that is. And markets are different. Industries are different. Physicians don't get that choice to stay home.
Well, and especially in the Dallas market, it's only going to get harder, right? There's more companies moving in here. And again, it goes back to your question of how do you attract and retain talent?
Yeah.
Well, what are we doing to support our people and to make them want to stay, right? As a parent, age 0 to age 5 looks very different from age 5 to age 10. And even kind of 5 to 7 is a little different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Age 7 and 8, as we both know, that's when sports start to get really hot and heavy. By age 10, some of these kids are in athletics or music programs or, political debates or, their games,
There are no shortage of activities.
They're almost part-time jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I've got some friends that their daughters dance 15, 30 plus hours a week.
Yeah. And they can't drive themselves.
But, club sports, I think I saw it was a $40 billion industry now. Shields didn't exist 20 years ago.
Right.
Right. So again, it's a different perspective of, I don't want to ever say that the generation that the parents are dealing with today is harder than what Gen X or baby boomers had, right? Promise you it was just as hard for that time. It's just different. And until we understand, again, those differences, it's hard for us to help our people, promote our people, develop our people when we don't know what their day-to-day life is really experiencing.
It's funny because I think everybody kind of knows that, but we don't really look under the hood that much. You've got this perspective. I have 4 kids. I have no choice. And my boss has no choice.
Yeah, well, that for me, that was kind of
fairly easy.
If you want to hire me and I really want to come, but I'm not losing my children. So they kind of come with me. It's a package deal.
But to your point, I think what I'm hearing you say is that if it's not coming up, advocate for yourself as that individual that still wants to work. And then you have to make sure that you show up and own what you need to get done.
And if you're in a situation in your office where that flexibility or those arrangements aren't there, right? And again, don't try to change things overnight. You're not going to change a situation or environment from one conversation. And once you understand and accept that, transparency is always key.
Yeah.
Right? Once people understand affiliations, what's going on, the dynamics of things are happening, that's when people start to change.
Sure. The number one inbound phone call that I get on a daily basis is, hey, Troy, they just announced return to office. What do you got?
Right.
And before we explore what that may look like, I always tell them, well, if you're happy, it's a second conversation. Hey, I get that's what we need to do. And maybe almost everybody needs to do it. But my situation is this. You have to advocate before you just never know. They literally are just like, well, if that's the way it's going to be, then I'm bolting instead of having the adult conversation in the room.
Well, even in AT&T's memo, right? He says in there, managers have to evaluate the detriment to team cohesion. So
it's a caveat.
If your team is not performing as a team because people aren't showing up with their work, their physical work, location irrelevant, right? Then you are sacrificing the quality of the product that the company needs to produce in order to be profitable, right? But if the team can handle everyone's schedule in a very fluid way, because that's the way life is, right? It's not work-life balance. It's really work-life harmony. How do we make all of this work together? Then if the team is functioning, then I say let the managers look at it because they're the best judge of their teams.
It's no easy conversations.
But it's not.
But it is the number one. I mean, pay is obviously there, but it's the thing that people just might as well lump it into culture because it is. It's how do you value your employees, which is how you attract and retain, which is kind of back to what we were talking about earlier. Anyway, we've talked a lot about on this topic.
Sure.
We could just keep on going. Where else we go? But
hit me up.
Is there anything else that you wanted before I ask my final question? Is there anything else that you wanted to dig in on that we haven't approached? I know you've got a pretty good career. We didn't cover it.
Troy, I used to talk and promote for a living, so
let me just
I could go down any rabbit hole you wanted. No, you're good.
Then let's wrap it up. And I'm just curious, because it was a slightly different career than most CFOs to get where you went, or to get where you've gotten today. But what's a takeaway that somebody that is trying to achieve where you've gotten yourself, and what could they do 5-10 years earlier?
Just keep asking questions about the big picture on whether it's the report that you're building, the analysis that you're doing, the project that you're a part of. How does what I'm doing fit into the greater scheme of things? Because I think the earlier in your career that you can start making the connections with different facets of the business, the more you'll understand the importance and the relevance of the work that you're doing. One. And two, I've been asked to do X. If I slightly change the scope and the request of the work, can I create more value because I understand where this is going?
Sure.
So, and I think in that valued creative aspect of the project or the work that you might have been tasked with, you're also letting your boss, your manager see how you think, right?
Yeah.
I did what you asked me to do, but I also kind of layered in some of these other elements that I think are impacting what we're trying to achieve and gave you another perspective on how this could flow.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you've added value.
Yeah.
And you took it upon yourself to do it.
So it shows that initiative. It shows that strategic and critical thinking. And, you may not get the opportunity to do that type of work, but the fact that you're asking the questions to your team leaders or your managers or the executives that might be in the room, they get a little bit of insight into how it is that you are perceiving the role, perceiving the project, the company, and how you're thinking. So.
That's awesome. It helps you stand out.
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
Instead of just doing a job. That is a perfect way to wrap up. I've enjoyed our time. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. All right. I'm Troy Ashby. And remember, people are more than their titles, and companies are more than their balance sheets. Follow Beyond the Ledger so you never miss an episode.